The following sermon, titled The Church and the Poor, was preached from the pulpit of Country Club Christian Church in Kansas City, Missouri, on April 16, 1967, by Dr. Lawrence W. Bash.
Surely there is no doubt that a valid part of the Christian tradition is compassion for the poor. It is so well established that I hardly need pause to do more than refer to the text, such a well-known passage, referring to feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, visiting the sick and the prisoner. Across 20 centuries, Christendom has been distinguished by its concern for the poor, for those who have been cast aside in a busy and careless world. The stereotype of the Church of the Middle Ages is the place to which poor people came. Where else could they go? I accept this as beyond question in the Christian tradition. To be a Christian is to be concerned for those who are impoverished, underprivileged, hopeless, etc. How a Christian expresses his concern for the poor in this age, however, becomes an exceedingly confusing question. Once it was simple. There was an earthquake in Chile, we gave them some money. There were families without enough food, we brought the cans at Christmas and sent baskets down. Well, this mass society outran us a while back. Now, welfare is a matter of public tax responsibility, and the churches have little by little seen themselves pushed to the side where they have only a peripheral relationship. Furthermore, lately, new factors have come into play which we have to take into account if we have any intention of living up to this claim of God upon us to live with compassion for other people. First, the technological revolution, such a commonplace, in which all persons without skills are permanently at the bottom of the barrel with no clear way out. Second, the welfare cycle, if I may call it this, in which people not only find themselves on the welfare rolls, but in which children grow up in such homes and live out their lives in such homes, and their children and their grandchildren. No one really thought this was going to happen, and it has brought a gulf in our society between haves and have-nots that is almost beyond our comprehension. Third, lately, in recent years, a bunch of churchmen, and particularly clergymen, have become interested in a new technique for dealing with the crying problems of our society, the technique called community organization. It is locally identified by association with the name of Saul Alinsky. It is not new. Community organization has been written about in social theory for 40 years or more. And Alinsky has been working in this country since 1938. But about 3 years ago, Kansas Cityans awoke to the fact that some churchmen were about to invite him to come to Kansas City to organize. And if you have any recollection, you know this caused quite a bit of excitement. It was in our press week on end, and the churches that were involved had a great deal of excitement over it. Actually, the disciples of Christ, the Kansas City Commission of the Christian Churches, which has many people in the poverty area, by its vote, not that of its congregations, decided to contribute $750 a year to this $40,000 a year program so that they would have a seat on the board and know what was happening. Whether it has been worth that money, I don't know. This is about $10 per congregation. None of the local congregations of the various churches, to my knowledge, took action on it, nor did we. But our denominational executives, catching a mood that is present across the country, thought this was a useful way of coming to grips with a very serious problem about which not too much seemed to be being done. So, 2 years ago, the invitation was extended. About 1 year ago, Mr. Linsky came and his organizer came, and the program now has been going for that period. Now, friend, if the church is concerned about the poor, then this is our business, whether we're personally involved in it and whether we're pro or con or not. This is one of the means by which some people have attempted to come to grips with the issue, and I ask your attention in as objective and fair a statement on this as I am able to make. Mr. Linsky's program has been set apart from all of the other things that have sought to help the poor by his method. And his method is that of insulting the power structure, saying harsh things about prominent people, which always makes the newspaper or television, and thus makes him well known. Those who are at the bottom of society see him as a hero. They therefore rally to his support, and in the process are united. Then when they're united, they can speak, so is the theory, with a louder voice in the councils of the community, and they can get what they want and what, from their point of view, they deserve in their rights within the city, state, and nation. Now, many of you who may have had contact with a child who developed the technique of throwing a tantrum to get his way or to get attention should know that the best way to solve that is to ignore him. Kansas City found it very difficult to do this, and we have had quite a lot of conversation over many a coffee table, etc., in this last year. What about the fears that existed when the program began? What about the hopes that there were for it? What has happened? I think it's worth pausing now because we are all caught up in this world, and we are going to have to solve some of these problems. Worth stopping to inquire. I am not talking about the anti-poverty program. I'm not talking about civil rights or the Negro Revolution. I'm not talking about the role of the federal government. I'm asking this question: what is the proper role of the church in public life, with special reference to the impoverished and disinherited? And I'm using the program of the Industrial Areas Foundation, the Saul Alinsky program, as the most prominent of all of those that we would be familiar with, in order to evaluate it and try to arrive at some personal moral judgments in this field. In Kansas City, the Alinsky program has become the Council for United Action, in the newspaper, CUA. And I thought we ought to find out what they think about it as to what they produced, and I am going to offer you an independent evaluation and then some personal opinions of my own. As I do this, I must say that I have deep respect for the clergymen who were instrumental in bringing Mr. Alinsky's program to Kansas City. Some of the most respected clergymen in Kansas City have had a hand in this and still have a hand in it. Their integrity and motivation is, in my judgment, beyond any question. I know that they have acted out of a deep sense of compassion and out of frustration with the inability of our society to do better for the poor than we have. I speak with the knowledge that I am a part of the middle class, or I hope I am a part of the middle class, and that our class is commonly charged with being unaware and unalert and complacent, not being able to see across the gulf to really understand what's going on the other side of the tracks, if you understand my use of that phrase. I am slightly nervous that I am speaking like Marie Antoinette in that famous phrase just before the French Revolution, when told that the people didn't have bread to eat, said, "Let them eat cake." Before we offer criticisms of efforts that are being made toward the solution of grave problems, we need to be sure that we're not just saying, "Let them eat cake." I also speak in the knowledge that there's a kind of complacency in this country that says of social issues, in effect, well, I may have malignancy, but thank God it's only on one side, on just one side of the tracks, as though it didn't really matter to the other side. Now, I want to be fair in the presentation of this problem, and I assure you that I think I'm preaching a sermon, whatever you think I'm doing, because I'm asking how I can fulfill the command of Jesus Christ to feed the hungry in my town and in my day. I have asked Reverend James Blair, minister of Central Christian Church, Linwood and Cleveland, who is not only a minister, but is the secretary of the Council for United Action, the Alinsky program, to prepare his own evaluation of what the program has done. If they believe it has been useful, I think we ought to hear what they say. He has given me a 2-page statement, which I obviously cannot report in full, but which we have mimeographed on this white paper, and when you leave, if you want a copy of it, ask the usher. One per family, please. I quote portions of this report from Mr. Blair. The Industrial Areas Foundation may not have quieted the fears engendered, nor realized the hopes envisioned by sending an organizer to Kansas City. Mr. Alinsky, however, promised an indigenous, self-determining, powerful organization that would represent the perspective of the poor. This promise he is in process of keeping. Then he reports that 64 organizations have now been brought together, representing churches, civil rights groups, social clubs, street clubs, and tenant associations. This done by residents of the poverty area, trained by the organizer himself. I think you will be interested in his report of an encounter with the police department about nearly a year ago, which was widely publicized. This is the way they see it. The people felt that the police were overstepping their bounds of authority, using unnecessary force, invading their privacy, and displaying attitudes unbecoming an officer of the law. In order to get the clergy involved and identified with the poor people's plight, a march was held on the police department. Both the CUA and the police department have benefited greatly in the area of public relations from that march. Also, the people learned that the control of the police department by the state, in that the board is appointed in Jefferson City and not by the mayor of Kansas City. They also learned how to file a complaint if they have one. We also learned that everyone with a complaint may not be telling the truth. I believe that better police and community relations citywide are a result. This is Mr. Blair's personal judgment, of course. He speaks then of the voter registration drive, which apparently had some results, but not very spectacular, of a convention held, and of their efforts then in regard to protesting the building of Northwest High School without assurances of the building of a middle school, and a number of details that, without stating completely, you can read this, relate to land clearance and redevelopment, central senior and junior highs with crowded conditions, utility officials on behalf of residents who have exorbitant water and gas bills welfare recipients placed back on the rolls who had been taken off on circumstantial evidence, etc. The final paragraph is, the Council for United Action is new. The members do not yet fully understand its implications, but I believe that progress is being made in winning the support of the people. Now, we ought to read this because it is the report of a man who is not a wild-eyed radical, in my judgment, and a minister of one of our churches. In addition to this, I offer you an evaluation made of this whole program, not in Kansas City because it was written before this program began, but rather of Mr. Alinsky's work in other places. No one can challenge the validity of community organization, not if you belong to the Country Club District Homes Association or any other, as most of you do. Probably the distinctive qualities of civic life in Kansas City relate as much to community organization and the pride and concern that has grown out of it as any other factor in past history. The question, of course, is what particular kind of organization is it? And especially, what is the relationship of churches to this kind of organization? There is a book published a number of months ago entitled Community Organization, Conflict, and Reconciliation, written by a preacher, Lyle Schaller of the United Church. It purports to be an objective, and I think he succeeds, an objective portrayal of this whole nationwide movement, in that he offers every argument for and every argument against. Thus, the book will not please anyone very much, but it does at least lay the problem out where we can sort out the issues that are involved in the heart of complex matters. I would like now to distill, and I have mimeographed this on blue paper, and this is available to you also when you leave. I have distilled here the argument of this book, not quoting, but paraphrasing the arguments he proposes. You will see that they are not coherent one with another. They often cancel other arguments out. It represents what is being said nationwide by people of various kinds about this type of program. First, arguments favoring the Alinsky program. What are they? One, his method of operation helps the disinherited to gain more sense of dignity and self-respect. Compared to traditional paternalistic attitudes in dispensing health and welfare services, the program helps people become participants in planning and carrying out programs designed to solve their problems. 2, it is believed that it helps to produce new leadership among the poor. 3, it has given the disinherited a louder voice in community decision-making processes. It has made effective use of public relations operations to advertise the needs of the impoverished. 4, it is supposed to produce democratic organizations through representative democracy. 5, it gives the poor some measure of power they have never had before by uniting their voices. 6, his methods, while admittedly controversial, do at least get things moving. In some cities, projects have been carried through which have improved the lot of the disadvantaged. Arguments against the Alinsky program, of which there are 7 offered. 1, some Negro leaders contend that the Alinsky program is still paternalistic in the sense that it is initiated, guided, and financed by white people. 2, other Negroes contend that Alinsky is a segregationist, since his famous Back of the Yards project in Chicago is segregated. He is also criticized by some white persons as an integrationist because of efforts for open housing. 3, a fundamental criticism is that he accepts the philosophy that the ends justify the means. This implies uses of power which may sometimes be destructive to the social fabric. 4, he often ignores traditional methods of effecting social change through the normal channels of political life. 5. He is sometimes accused of using Marxist tactics of class warfare. In effect, this means he has ignored or opposed existing community organizations designed to help the poor. 6. His use of the scapegoat tactic is unfair and dangerous to the democratic process. He unites the disinherited by choosing individuals or organizations to attack as the enemy. This leads to conflict and fragmentation of the city or society. And 7, it misrepresents itself when it presents its program as indigenous to the poor, when in fact leadership and funds have been drawn largely from the middle classes. Now, the summary this man makes is simple enough. He gives us 5 issues that in his judgment are determinative as you seek evaluation. What are they? 1, the theological question. Does the end justify the means? Is it right to do evil in order to achieve a good goal? 2, the Alinsky methods. Proponents say that social justice and helping the impoverished to gain the right of self-determination and achieve a place of power in the community is of overriding importance. Critics believe that power used to produce conflict, to increase alienation, to play on the fears and hostilities of people to win their allegiance, to seek to create controversy for the sake of controversy, is self-defeating in a democratic society. 3, a review of past Alinsky projects indicates that the program cannot supply all the answers for any severely blighted community. The ultimate solution may lie in cooperation of all institutions and agencies to alleviate poverty rather than in conflict between them. And I add, with conflict, cooperation becomes much more remote. Point 4, it is not at all clear that the apathy and indifference of the lower classes can be banished by the Alinsky program. And 5, churchmen are, quote, religious romantics, unquote, for believing Alinsky can solve community problems. He is apparently not taken seriously by politicians, political scientists, planners, social workers, social scientists, etc. I offer you this as an objective analysis of this important area in which there is so much conflict in order to help you work your own way through. Now, may I offer a few personal comments? First, I think, in the light of what was thought a year or 2 years ago, perhaps we ought to pause to offer congratulations to the local leadership of this movement that there has not been anything out of line other than, in my judgment, a very badly conceived move on the police department, which misfired and led to considerable misunderstanding. What were your fears, friend, when you first heard about it, if you had fears? Not many of those have been realized, and I would hope that those who guide this program would know we are grateful for such moderation as they have exercised. Further, with considerable reluctance to criticize efforts that I know to be well-intentioned, with the knowledge that some things may be happening that are good that I don't know about, and with all of the humility of one who can be asked, but what did you do about it? I still must confess that I have some perplexities as to the role of the church in public affairs, and particularly in this grave and very important issue. Will you hear me as I express these concerns? First, the problem is probably going to become larger than it is, because recently, apparently, national denominational bodies have organized the Institute of Social Organizers in cooperation with Mr. Alinsky, which will make this a nationwide program in which churches will have considerable involvement, though this is not at all clear. So, I am interested to note this. Second, it has been advertised that recently Mr. Stokely Carmichael, who is known as a leading exponent of black power, had made some kind of alliance with Mr. Alinsky in which they would jointly train organizers to go into various cities. These are both matters of some significance in my judgment. Now, friend, in the hope that my sense of compassion for the disinherited remains vigorous, and that I believe I must do everything in my power to help the poor, how can I make my witness effective in this world and in this immensely confused situation? These are the problems I'm struggling with, and which in a sense I address to my fellow clergymen. First, I am finding it very difficult to slough off a lifetime habit of reconciliation. Now, perhaps reconciliation is more words than deeds, but all my life I have seen the church as the instrument of reconciliation. If there was a barrier, it was our business to knock it down. If there was a gulf, we sought to make a bridge across it. I find it rather difficult to shift my gears so rapidly here to become the exponent of conflict rather than of reconciliation. I am stuck with the conviction of the unity of truth. What is true in this pulpit is true in every other pulpit, indeed in every other place, or it is not true here. If loving your neighbor, even loving your enemies, is the gospel I proclaim here, I find it difficult to begin coercing my enemies or coercing my friends in the name of at least religious faith. The problem of conflict is serious enough in our society that I am not yet able to discover how I can add to this with a clear conscience. I second address this issue. I am unable so quickly to translate my concept of the mission of the church into these terms. If you've been around here, you know that my concept of the church is that we are the servant people of God, those whom God has reached with His saving love, who become the instruments or channels of His saving love to the whole world. And if that's true on one side of the tracks, it's true on the other side of the tracks. I have contended quite a bit, and with what success I am not clear, to persuade you that a commonly held image of the church is false. That image is that the church is the most subtle and delightful of all instruments of self-advantage. The churches are little private clubs where the elite gather together to preen themselves. That to belong to a church is to get status and privilege. That the church is an instrument of our self-advantage. I'm stuck with that conviction. And I do not know just how to translate that into terms that are being proposed in these days. It seems to me that in a Negro church and in a church of the white poor, they are still the servant people of God. I would be quite awkward, I think, if I should become the voice of the self-interest of this congregation, in which I claimed a larger slice of the pie, to use one of Mr. Alinsky's favorite phrases, for my people, though I know quite well some of you are on the verge of bankruptcy. And that's no joke. I know that some of you are having a very hard struggle. But it is not my place as a minister of God to claim the self-advantage of you, my people. If truth is one, it leaves me confused. 3, and this is already slipped in, conflict as the instrument of social change worries me in an age which has conflict, has perhaps all it can bear sometimes it seems it has already more than it can bear. Conflict slips so readily into violence as it has in many a headline in recent years. This is what concerns me with the possible alliance with black power. Friend, black power is a racist statement. I do not like white racism, and I have said so. And I do not like black racism for exactly the same reason, and I am willing to say so. Whenever we begin to use the instrumentalities of society as tools for the advantage of any one group, then we have lost the perspective from which the church must view the whole human scene. I would suggest that we review the fact that extremism always begets more extremism before we move further in that direction. Fourth, I am not persuaded that the end justifies the means. I know that it's the new morality. I know there's a whole chapter devoted to this idea in Joseph Fletcher's Situation Ethics, which seems to have swept the country. I know there are many people who live by that philosophy, but I am not persuaded that it is the Christian philosophy, nor do I believe that when one tries to work from that philosophy with the motivation of Christian love, he is likely to produce much of what I have seen in the present world. Fifth, I'm having to say so little on these things. Please forgive my hurry, but my time is about up. Fifth, I bear with many people the concern for our whole society today, in that while there is indeed agony, our society itself, the free society, is on trial and challenged as never before. Our way of life is the product of a very long struggle in history, the only time almost it's ever come about in the history of mankind. It is a fragile thing. It can be maintained only with some sense of responsibility on the part of all people. It seems to me that we need today charity for one another, including those who disagree with us, or whatever your position may be, with you on this issue as well as every other issue. We must move forward with an immense sympathy, with a determination to get at the facts, to discover, to recover, to have for ourselves true empathy with the despairing and hopeless, and yet not to knock our society down in the process.